All right, the first type of function that we're really going to be dealing with, the main type of function that we're going to be dealing with in this class, frankly, is cost, revenue, and profit functions. Because this, it's when you're talking about trying to start a business, this definitely these are the sorts of things you want to pay attention to. And so when you're producing items, we're going to first look at the various costs that you can have. We're going to start off with something called fixed costs. These are generally one-time costs, or non-recurring. Well, they can be recurring. They are costs that don't depend on the number of items. These might be things like rent. So, for instance, if you're paying rent for a building, they don't care if you sit in there and you don't do anything at all, or if it's incredibly productive, they're going to charge you the same amount for rent. So it doesn't depend on how many items you made. That's a good. I don't know. If you have a, I don't know. There's other various things that could be fixed costs. In any case, we're going to use the letter B generally to refer to fixed costs. Marginal cost, this is the cost to produce one more item. I guess a fixed cost, sometimes these are also called startup costs. If you're purchasing a machine, the machine doesn't care how many items you make. I mean, yeah, I suppose your maintenance might go up. Your maintenance would probably be part of your marginal cost, though. Your startup cost, purchasing the machine in the first place, that's part of your fixed cost. Your marginal cost is the cost to produce one more item. So you have everything set up. That would be the raw materials, the labor, the electricity, that sort of stuff. You could even go so far as to say things like if you have hourly employees down here, that's probably going to be part of your marginal cost. If you have, what do you call it? I can't remember at the moment. If you have employees that you pay once a month, salary, that's what you call it. You pay them once a month and you don't have a specific number of hours. You just say, get these things done. Generally, salaried employees would be part of your fixed costs. So you can see even your costs, your employee costs can even be split between fixed and marginal costs. Your marginal costs, though, this is the cost to produce one additional item. We'll generally call that M. And your total cost here, well, it's going to be the cost per item times the number of items plus whatever your startup costs are. And hey, look at that, mx plus b, that looks familiar. Instead of saying y equals, I'm going to say c of x equals to talk about the total cost. And this one, for whatever reason, we generally do that with a capital C. So capital C for cost equals mx plus b. The m here is referring to the marginal cost, the b is referring to your startup cost. Alright, your revenue is the money that you take in by selling goods. So the revenue doesn't care about, your costs don't matter at all when you're talking about your revenue. This is literally however much you sell your items for times the number of items you sell them. Times the number of items you sell. So this is going to be equals, I kind of don't want to call it M because I just used that up here. I'll go ahead and call this, what did I call it before? PX. This is the selling price. So you're selling your items. You're going to, whatever cost you charge for your items times the number of items that you sold is your revenue. You'll notice that there is no the y-intercept here is 0. If you were to sell 0 items, your revenue would be $0. No one's going to pay you just to have the business open. So it's just going to be P times X. Profit is the thing that you're generally most interested in business. And your profit, we're going to call this P of X, a capital P, just like the capital R was for revenue and the capital C was for cost, is going to be your revenue minus your costs. So once we start talking about things like this, R of X, C of X, and P of X, this is where the idea of functions really start to come in handy. Because now we don't have to write out words. We can just say R of X. We don't have to write out a big long formula or a big long formula there. We can understand that R of X is the revenue. If we update our model to have a different revenue, we can update this really easily. If we update our model to have a different cost, we can update this really easily. And you can see both of those, of course, would affect our profit. One thing you do want to take into account is that when you're substituting in, if you're plugging in mx plus b for cost here, you want to make sure you put it in parentheses, because it's, if you do px, oh, that's the problem with doing p, isn't it? Because I'm using p for profit. Let's do p's not price. Let's do, whatever, I'll just make something up. Let's call it a. Ax minus mx plus b. I would want to make sure that I put this cost function in parentheses. It's not really necessary around the revenue, although technically you could do it, but you'd be able to drop those parentheses immediately. The reason it's necessary over here is because then this negative, this subtraction ends up being distributed through the parentheses. The same as saying plus the opposite of these parentheses, so the negativity gets distributed through. So really it ends up looking kind of like this when we distribute through the parentheses. All right, the break-even point is definitely a point that is of interest when you're running a business. It's when your profit gets to 0. It may sound like a bad thing when your profit gets to 0, but that's actually a good point, because before that your profit was negative. If your costs are exceeding your revenue, you're not producing and selling enough, then you're going to be losing money. Your profit is going to be negative. So the break-even point is where you can say this two ways. You can either say your profit is equal to 0, or you can say your revenue equals your costs. Now, if you're actually trying to find your break-even point, it doesn't matter which one of these two methods you use. If you already figured out what your profit function is, you might as well use that one. Or you can use P of X equals C of X, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Profit is one of those interesting quantities. It's one of the few quantities that we regularly encounter in the real world where it actually makes sense to be a negative number. Most of the time when you see negative numbers in the real world, they kind of don't make sense. You say, I've traveled a negative 3 meters. That just doesn't make any sense because that has some sort of directionality associated with it. That's what the negativity is. Profit is one of those things. If you say my profit is negative $100, that means you've lost $100. If your profit is $50, that means you've gained $50 because it's a positive number. So you'll notice that both your costs should be positive, well, non-negative at least. I guess suppose your costs could be 0 if you're kind of lucky. If your startup costs are 0 and you're not producing anything, then your total costs are $0. Your revenue can definitely be $0 as well. But other than that, these end up going positive. Both of these are going to go up. And so, if you were to kind of graph all these, let's think about how it would look. Your revenue would look something like this. Your costs start up high, and they go up. And your break-even point actually ends up being this point right here. It's where your revenue, that's this line right here, R of X, equals your costs. It's right there. That's your break-even point. That's where your profit is going to equal 0. Before then, over here, if you're producing and selling this many items, this is your cost, this is your revenue. You're kind of upside down. You're spending more money than you're getting. Over here, your profits are positive because your revenues exceed your costs. That's, ideally that's where you want to get, but you want to get at least to the break-even point.